Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What Is True. I am actually on YouTube channel Discerning What Is True, and I'm also actually on Odyssey with the same name. And today is the 7th day of January 2023, and I hope you guys are doing okay. And we're going to continue to do some reading here with the Hierarchy of the Committee of 300, which was written by John Coleman. This is Dr. John Coleman, who wrote this book. Years ago, and he spells out basically how they've continually moved in that direction. So what we're going to look at is some other agencies, or what we would call in political science think tanks, and there are many of them. And we'll start here with the Mon Pelerin, that's Pelerin Society. It's an economic foundation devoted to issuing misleading economic theories and influencing economics in the Western world to follow models it lays out from time to time. Its leading practitioners are von Hayek, Hayek, and Milton Friedman. The next agency that you would think is actually started as actually fighting communists is no longer. It's the Hoover Institution. It was to deal with the constant communism, and the institution itself has slowly but surely turned towards socialism. It has an annual budget of $2 million funded by companies under the umbrella of the Committee of 300. It's now concentrated on peaceful change with emphasis on arms control, domestic U.S. problems. It is frequently used by the news media as a conservative organization whose views they seek when a conservative viewpoint is needed. But the Hoover Institute is far from that, and following the 1953 takeover of the institution by a group of allied to the Club of Rome, it has become a one world, new world order outlet for desirable politics. So what's happened to this group is now controlled and steered by them, this particular think tank, and no longer a conservative basics anymore. But they've used this. They use this right left type of paradigm over and over again. Another agency called the think tank is called Heritage Foundation, founded by a brewer named magnate called Joseph Coors to act as a conservative think tank. Heritage was soon taken over, though, by Fabians, Sir Peter Vickens Hall, Stuart Butler, Stephen Azay, Robert Moss, and Frederick von Haig, which is the same guy. Is that the same guy? Maybe. No. Maybe it is the same guy. Sure is. Same guy at the first organization called the Montpelier Society. Under the direction of Club of Rome, this institution played a major role in carrying out British Labour leader Anthony Wedgwood been ordered to Thatcherize Reagan. So what they want to do is him to be more like her, you see. So get right in there in a second here. Okay. Another group is called the Human Resources Research Office. This is the Army research establishment dealing in psychotechnology. Most of the personnel are Tavistock trained. Psychotechnology covered by GI, motivation, morale, and music used by the enemy. In fact, a lot of what George Orwell wrote about in his book 1984 appears to be remarkably similar to what is taught at Humbre. Again, that's the name of the organization, Human Resources Research Office. And in 1969, the Committee of 300 took over this important institution and turned it into a private nonprofit organization run under the auspices of the Club of Rome. It is the largest behavioral research group in the United States. One of the specialists in this group of small groups under distress in human relationships with the Army teaches that the Army that a soldier is merely a extension of his equipment and has brought great influence to bear on the man weapon system and his human quality control. So widely accepted by the United States Army. This particular organization has had a very pronounced effect on how the Army conducts itself. Its mind-bending techniques are straight out of Tavistock. This organization applies psychology. Courses are supposed to teach Army brass how to make the human weapon work. A good example of this is the manner in which soldiers in the war against Iraq were willing to disobey their field manual standing orders and bury 12,000 Iraqi soldiers alive. I didn't know that. I did not know that at all. I'd like to know more about that. The type of brainwashing is terribly dangerous because today it is applied to the Army. The Army applies it to brutally destroy thousands of enemy soldiers. And tomorrow the Army could be told that civilian population groups opposed to government policies are the enemy. Yes, indeed. We are already a mindless, brainwashed flock of sheep, folks. Yet it seems that this group can take mind bending and mind control a step further. Human relationships with the Army is a valuable adjunct to Tavistock, and many of the lessons taught with this group were applied in the Gulf War, which makes it a little easier to understand how it came to be that American soldiers behave as ruthless and heartless killers, a far cry from the concept of traditional American fighting men. The next group is the Research Analysts Corporation. This is Humoro's sister organization that is 1984 organization situated in McLean, Virginia. Established in 48, it was taken over by the Committee of 361 when it became part of the Johns Hopkins bloc. It has worked on over 600 projects, including integrating Negroes into Army, the tactical use of nuclear weapons, the psychological warfare programs, and mass population control. Obviously, there are many more major think tanks, and we shall come to most of them in this book. One of the most important areas of cooperation between what think tanks turn out and what becomes government and public policy are the pollsters. It is the job of the polling companies to mold and shape public opinion in the way that suits the conspirators. Polls are constantly being taken by CBS, even NBC, ABC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Most of these efforts are coordinated at the National Opinion Research Center, where, much as it will amaze most of us, a psychological profile was developed for the entire nation. Findings are fed into a computer of Gallup poll and Yankovich, Skelly, and White for comparative evaluations. Much of what we read in our newspapers or see on television has first been cleared by the polling companies. What we see is what the pollsters think we should see. This is called public opinion making. The whole idea behind this bit of social conditioning is to find out how responsive the public is to policy directives. Handling down by the Committee of 300, we are called target population groups. What is measured by the pollsters is how much resistance is generated to what appears in the nightly news. Later, we shall learn exactly how this deceptive practice got started and who is responsible for it. It is all part of the elaborate opinion-making process created at Tavistock. So let me explain what I'm going to jump off a little tangent here, just to explain to you. What is Tavistock, the Committee of 300, and others have done simply is they're like moles. They go in to every different areas of what we call institutions here in the United States and subvert them. They basically change their whole policies of what they're all about or what they feel it should be about and change them. And instead of being actually advantageous for the public, they've now become advantageous for this group of people who want to rule the world. That's what's going on. This is all taking place at the educational level. It's far more sinister than ever before. The planning of all this, the destruction of the destruction of humanity is taking place right before our eyes, folks. That's what's happening. So they galvanize, they take polls, they galvanize people into certain groups, such and such, and begin to attack that group, such and such, or they minimize their attack. That is, they speak out such and such, and yet very few people are aware of it. They don't even understand what's going on before them. This group is enormously wanting to control everything and pushing people to a certain way they want them to think. And those who refuse, they begin to either ostracize, push them to the side, you see, because they're no longer getting any support from the news agencies because they now are controlled. Polling was bought to a fine art just before the United States entered the Second World War. Americans, unbeknownst to themselves, were conditioned to look upon Germany and Japan as dangerous enemies who had to be stopped. In a sense, this was true. That makes conditional thinking all the more dangerous because based on the information fed to them, the enemy did indeed appear to be Germany and Japan. Just recently, we saw how well Tavistock conditioning process works when Americans were conditioned to perceive Iraq as a threat, Saddam Hussein as a personal enemy of the United States. Yeah, it's laughable. It is actually laughable. It's a joke. How in the world would Iraq be a threat to the United States is a joke. And yet they engineered this whole thing, apparatus, to actually do certain things to allow people to think that they truly are a threat, you see. The same thing in some ways like with Ukraine, the situation, although it's not the same though. Again, they want to paint certain groups, you know, now the Russians are the bad people. I've actually had conversations with a particular person in the last 6 months, or a little longer than that, and I eventually had to disconnect with him because, frankly, he became somewhat belligerent, as though Russia was the enemy, and I was like, no, it's not really the enemy. It's just what they want you to think they are the enemy. This is how they're so clever. People think that the media is not biased, but it is. It's completely biased, completely. And the people that work there, I'm afraid they don't even know what they're doing. They work in the media in certain positions. They just got a job, and they don't quarrel with it. They get paid well, and they just go along with the system. They don't see it. Or maybe I should say they don't want to see it. So we get back to the article here. Such a conditioning process is technically described as the message reaching the sense organs of persons to be influenced. One of the most respected of all posters is Committee of 300 member Dan Yankovic of the company Yankovic and Skeleton and White. Yankovic is proud to tell his students that polling is a tool to change public opinion. Although this is not original, Yankovic, having drawn his inspiration from David Nasbeck from a book called Trend Report, which was commissioned by the Club of Rome. In his book, Nasbeck described all the techniques used by public opinion makers to bring about the public opinion desired by the Committee of 300. Public opinion making is the jewel in the crown of the Olympians, which there are thousands of new social scientists at their beck and call, with the news media firmly in their hands. New public opinion on almost any subject can be created and disseminated around the world in a matter of 2 weeks. Probably less than that now. This is precisely what happened when their servant George Bush was ordered to make war on Iraq. Within 2 weeks, not only the United States but almost the entire world public opinion was turned against Iraq and President Saddam Hussein. These media change articles, artists, and news manipulators report directly to the Club of Rome, which in turn reports to the Committee of 300, at whose head sits the Queen of England, ruling over the vast network of closely linked corporations who never pay taxes and are answerable to no one, who fund their research institutions through foundations whose joint activities have almost total control over our daily lives. Together with their interlocking companies, insurance business, banks, financial corporations, oil companies, newspapers, magazines, radio and television, this vast apparatus sits astride the United States and the world. There is not a politician in Washington, D.C. who is not somehow beholden to it. The left rails against it, calling it imperialism, which indeed it is, but the right and left is run by the same people, the very same ones who control the right, so that the left is no more free than we are. Scientists engaged in the process of conditioning are called social engineers or new science social scientists, and they play an intricate part in what we see, hear, and read. The old school social engineers were Kurt K. Lewin, Professor Haley Cantrell, C-A-N-T-R-I-L, Margaret Mead, Professor Darwin Cartwright, and Professor Lipset, who, together with John Rollins Rees, made up the backbone of new science scientists at Tavistock Institute. During the Second World War, there were over 100 researchers at work under the direction of Kurt Lewin, copying slavishly the methods adopted by Reinhard Heydrich of the SS. The OSS was based on Heydrich's methodology, and as we know, the OSS was the forerunner of the Central Intelligence Agency. The point of all this is that the governments of Britain and the governments of the United States already have their machinery in place to bring us into a line and new world order with only a slight modification of resistance materialization, and this machinery has been in place since 1946. Each passing year has added new refinements. It is this Committee of 300 which has established control networks, mechanism far more binding than anything ever seen in the world. Chains and ropes are not needed to restrain us. Our fear of what is to come does that job far more efficiently than any physical means of restraint. We have been brainwashed to give up our constitutional rights to bear arms, to give up our Constitution itself, to allow the United Nations to exercise control over our foreign policy, and the IMF to take control of our fiscal and monetary policy, to permit the president to break the United States law with impunity and to invade a foreign country and kidnap his head of state. In short, we have been brainwashed to the extent where we as a nation will accept each and every lawless act carried out by our government almost without question. I, for one, know that we will soon have to fight to reclaim our country from the committee or lose it forever. But when it comes right down to it, how many will actually take up arms? In 1776, only 3% of the populace took up arms against King George III. This time around, 3% will be woefully inadequate. We should not allow ourselves to be led down dead-end roads, for that is what our mind controllers have planned for us by confronting us with such complexities of issues that we simply succumb to long-range penetration and make no decision at all on many vital issues. We shall be looking at the names of those who make up the Committee of 300, but before we do that, we should examine the massive interfacing of all important institutions, companies, and banks under the committee control. We must mark them well because these are the people who are deciding who shall live and who shall be eliminated as useless eaters, where we will worship God, what we must wear, and even what we shall eat, according to Brzezinski. We shall be under endless surveillance around the clock for 365 days a year ad infinitum. That we have been betrayed from within is being accepted by more and more people each year, and that is good because it is true knowledge, a word translated from the word belief, that we shall be able to defeat the enemy of all mankind. While we were being distracted by the boogeymen in the Kremlin, the Trojan horse was moved into position in Washington, D.C. The greatest danger free people face today is not from Moscow. It isn't, folks. It's not there, but from Washington, D.C. We needed first to conquer the domestic enemy, and after that, we will be strong enough to mount an offensive to remove communism from the earth altogether with all of its attendant isms. The Carter administration accelerated the collapse of our economy and our military strength, which I've said earlier. The latter begun by Club of Rome and Lucas, L-U-C-I-S Trust member Robert Strange McNamara. In spite of his promises, Reagan continued to undermine an industrial base, starting where Carter left off. While we need to keep our defenses strong, we cannot do that for a weak industrial base, or without a well-run military-industrial complex, we cannot have a defense system. Well, I have a little problem with this simply because that seems like we're walking right in the same trap. You see, I don't think it's going to be a war, so to speak. It will be a war on the mind here. So I don't agree with what John Coleman's saying here. You have to understand he wrote this book probably 16 years ago. I think it was 2005. Don't hold me to that. Maybe even early back than that. We don't have any industrial base anymore in this country. We haven't had it since probably early 2000. All of it, and it's just been completely come apart. This is done on purpose, so to speak. And you can see that the other countries in the world are rising up, especially China. And a lot of times, simply important parts are now coming from China. They're not even made here in America for our military, which is like, this is asinine. But you got to understand that you have congressmen who are just, don't see things that way. They don't care. They really don't care, you see. Very few of them care. Thanks to the Club of Rome, our technology potential has dropped below that of Japan and Germany, nations we are supposed to have defeated, that is, in the Second World War. How has that come about? Because of men like Dr. Andrew King and our blindfolded state of mind, we have failed to recognize the destruction of our educational institution, yes, big time, and system of teachings, yes. As a result of our blindness, we are no longer training engineers and scientists in sufficient numbers to keep up among the industrial nations of the world. Well, it's not only that, simply they're just completely brainwashed these days. They're not even taught anything. Thanks to Dr. King, a man very few people even heard about in America, and who was educated in the United States, is at its lowest level since 1786. Statistics produced by the Institute for Higher Learning show that the reading and writing capability of high school children in the United States are lower than they were among high school students, that is in 1786. I don't know how you got those statistics because there wasn't many high schools back then, 1786. It might be meaning 1886. Thank you. High school is interesting too because simply is that most schools back then were taught three ways, either by home, taught at home, so either reading the Bible or reading a dictionary, how you learn how to pronounce things, or you had um, a tutor who would come to you and teach you, or you went to a parochial, probably most of the time a Catholic school. What we face today is not only the loss of our freedom and the very fabric of our nation, but far worse, the possibility of the loss of our souls. The steady chipping away at the foundation upon which this republic rests has left an empty void which Satanists and cultists are rushing to fill with their synthetic soul material. This truth is difficult to accept in appreciate because there was nothing suddenly about their events. It's a sudden shock were to hit us, a cultural and religious shock, we would be shaken out of our apathy. But gradualism, which is what Fabianism is, does nothing to raise the alarm, because the vast majority of Americans can see no motivation for the things I have described. They cannot accept it, and so the conspiracy is scorned and often mocked by creating chaos through presenting hundreds of daily choices our people have to make. We have come down to a position where, unless motivation can be clearly shown, all information is rejected. This is both the weak and the strong link in conspiratory chain. Most brush aside anything that has no motive, so the conspirators feel safe behind the ridicule point upon those who point to the coming crisis in our nation and our individual lives. However, if we can get enough people to see the truth, the motivation block gets weaker until it will eventually be forced aside as more and more people become enlightened, and the notion that this cannot happen in America is dispensed with. The Committee of 300 is counting on our maladaptive responses to govern our reaction to create events, and it will not be disappointed as long as we as a nation continue in the present way we respond. We must turn responses to creative crisis into adaptable responses by identifying the conspirators and exposing their plans for us, so that these things become public knowledge. The Club of Rome has already made the transition to barbarism. Instead of waiting to be raptured, we must stop the Committee of 300 before it can accomplish its goal of making us prisoners of the new dark age planned for us. It is not up to God, it is up to us. We have to take the necessary action. All information that I provide in this book comes from years of research backed up by impeccable intelligence sources. Nothing is exaggerated. It's factual and precise, so do not fall into the trap set by the enemy that this method is disinformation. For the past 2 decades, I have provided information which has proved to be highly accurate, which has explained a lot of puzzling events. My hope is that through this book, a better, clearer, and wider understanding of the conspiratory forces ranged against this nation will come about. That hope is being realized as more and more young people are really beginning to ask questions and seek information about what really is going on. It is difficult for people to comprehend that these conspirators are real and that they have the power. I and many others have attributed to them. Many have written to ask, how is it that our government does nothing about the terrible threat to civilization? The problem is that our government is part of the problem, part of the conspiracy. And nowhere at no time has this become more evident or more clearly evident than during the Bush administration or Bush presidency. Of course, President Bush knows precisely what the Committee of 300 is doing to us. He works for them. Others have written to say, we thought we were fighting the government. Of course we are. But behind government stands a force so powerful and all-encompassing that intelligence agencies are even afraid to mention the name Olympians. Proof of the Committee of 300 is found in the vast number of powerful institutions owned and controlled by it. Listed here are some of the most important ones, all of which come under the mother of all think tanks and research institute, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, with its far-flung network of hundreds of branches. The first one would be the Stanford Research Center, was founded in 1946 by the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. Stanford was created to help Robert O. Anderson and his Arco Oil Company, who had secured for the Committee of 300 the oil rights on the North Slope of Alaska. Basically, the job was too large for Anderson's Aspen Institute to handle, so a new center had to be founded and funded. That new center was Stanford Research Center. Alaska sold its rights. I didn't know this. This is wild. Alaska sold its right on a down payment of $900 million, a rather small amount for the Committee of 300, The governor of Alaska was steered to SRI for help and advice. This was no accident, but the result of judicious planning, and process of a long-range conditioning. Following the governor's call for help, 3 SRI scientists set up shop in Alaska, where they met with the Alaska Secretary of State and the State Planning Office, Francis Greetham, Greehan, who headed the SRI team, assured the governor that his problem of how to handle the rich oil find would be safe in the hands of Stanford Research Institute. Naturally, Greetham did not mention the Committee of 300 or the Club of Rome. In less than a month, Greetham assembled a team of economists, petroleum scientists, and new scientists, numbering in the hundreds. The report SRI gave to the governor ran to 88 pages. The proposal was adopted virtually without change by the Alaska legislation in 1970. Greetham had indeed done a remarkable job for the Committee of 300. From this beginning, SRI developed into an institution employing 4,000 people with an annual budget of $160 million. Its president, Charles A. Anderson, has seen much of this growth during his tenure as his Professor Willis Harman, director of SR Center for Study of Social Politics, employing hundreds of new scientists, many of the top staffers having been transferred from Tavistock in London. One of those was RCA's board chairman and former British intelligence agent David Sarkoff, who was closely involved with Harman and his team for 25 years. Sarkoff was something of a watchdog for the Mother Institute in Sussex. Stanford claims to make no moral judgments on projects it accepts, working for Israel and the Arabs, South Africa, Libya. As one would imagine, by adopting this attitude, it ensures an inside edge. You better believe it. With foreign governments that the CIA has found more useful. In Jim Ridgway's book, The Closed Corporation, SRI spokesman Gibson brags about SRI's non-discriminated status. Although not on the Federal Contract Research Center list, SRI is today the largest military think tank, dwarfing Hudson and Rand. Among SRI specialty departments are chemical and biological warfare experimental centers. One of Stanford's most dangerous activities is counterinsurgency operations aimed at civilian population, just the sort of 1984 things government is already using against its own people. The U.S. government pays SRI millions of dollars each year for this kind of highly controversial research. Following student protests against chemical warfare experiments conducted at Stanford, SRI sold itself to a private group for just $25 million. Of course, nothing really changed. SRI was still a Tavistock project, and the Committee of 300 still own it. But the gullible appeared to be satisfied with this meaningless cosmetic change. In 1958, a startling new development arose. Advanced Research Products Agency, that's ARPA, is a contracting agency for the Defense Department. Approached SRI with a top secret proposal. John Forrest at the Pentagon told SRI that what was needed was a program to assure the United States against technological surprise. Foster wanted to perfect a condition where the environment became a weapon. Special bombs to trigger volcanoes or earthquakes. Behavior research on potential enemies and minerals and metals with potential for new weapons. The project was accepted by SRI and codenamed Shaky, S-H-A-K-Y. The massive electronic brain, S-H-K-Y, Shaky, was capable of carrying out many commands, its computers having been constructed by IBM for SRI. 28 scientists worked on what is called human augmentation. The IBM computer even has the ability to solve problems by analog and recognizes and identifies scientists who work with it. The special application of this tool can be better imagined than described. Brzezinski knew what he was talking about when he wrote the word the technotronical error. Stanford Research Institute works closely with scores of civilian consulting firms trying to apply military technology to domestic situations. This has not always been a success, but as techniques improve, the prospect for massive all-prevailing surveillance, as described by Brzezinski, daily becomes more real. It already exists and is in use, even though slight malfunctions from time to time have to be ironed out. One such civilian consultant firm was Stryker McKee Associates. I've spelled that to you. S-C-H-R-I-E, Stryker, E-V-E-R, McKee, M-C-K-E-E, Associates out of McLean, Virginia. Run by retired General Bernard A. Stryker, a former chief of the Air Force Systems Command who developed the Titan, Thor, Atlas, and Minuteman rockets. Stryker put together a consortium of Lockheed, Emerson Electric, Northrop, Control Data, Raytheon, and TRW under the name of Urban Systems Associates Incorporated. The purpose of the consortium: to solve social and psychological urban problems by means of military techniques using advanced electronic systems. It's interesting to note that TRW, oh, this is right, that's what you think about. It became the largest credit information collecting agency in the credit reporting business as a result and outcome to his work with Urban System Association Incorporated. So Lockheed is a aircraft company, but they've been bought out. I believe, I think that's correct. Emerson Electric is massive. Northrop is another military operation. Raytheon is also a major one, and then TRW is trans something, a TRW, I remember. But they own some companies, and now they've gotten rid of some. Raytheon and Control Data. I think Control Data may be Honeywell. I might be wrong about that, so don't hold me that. So, so TRD. I don't think TRW is no longer doing the credit deal. I think or either they got bought out by somebody. But anyway, remember this book is over, at least 16 to 20 years old. We don't have any more up-to-date type of information because most of this is being kept for most people now. So very few people, it seems dated. Yes, it is, but it's all we've got right now to understand what's going on. This should tell us a great deal about just how far this nation is already under total surveillance, which is the first requirement of the Committee of 300. No dictatorship, especially not one on global scale, can function without total control over each and every individual. SRI was well on its way to becoming a key Committee of 300 research organizations. By the 1980s, 60% of SRI's contracts were devoted to futurism, with both military and civilian applications. Its major clients were U.S. Department of Defense, Directorial Defense Research and Engineering, Office of Aerospace Research, which dealt with applications of behavior science to research management, Executive Office of the President, Office of Science and Technology, and U.S. Department of Health. On behalf of the Department of Health, SRI ran a program called Patterns in what we call ESDEA Title I Reading Achievement Test. Other clients were the U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Transportation, National Science Foundation, NSF, or snippets with the papers developed for NSF entitled Assessment of Future and International Problems. Let me get a breath here, folks. With Stanford Research under the tutelage of Tavistock Institute in London, put together a far-reaching and chilling system. It's called Business Intelligence Program. In excess of 600 companies in the U.S. and abroad became subscribers. The program covered research in Japanese foreign business relations, consumer market in a period of change, the mounting challenge of international terrorism, sensory evaluations, consumer products, electronic funds transfer system, optoelectric sensing, exploratory planning methods, the U.S. defense and industry and capital availability. Among the top committee of 300 countries who became clients of this program were Bechtel, yes, Bechtel Corporation, which was George Shultz, was on this board, who was a former Secretary of State, actually, I think, under George W. Bush. Could be wrong. Could have been actually the old man George Bush. Hewitt Packard, TRW again, Bank of America, Shell Company, RCA, which I think RCA is gone, Blyth, B-L-Y-T-H, Eastman Dillon, Saga Foods Corporation, I've never heard of them, McDonnell Douglas, which I think is gone. I think McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed merged. I think that's what happened. Crown Zetterbach and Wells Fargo Bank and the Kaiser Industries. Let me look that up real quick here, since I can find it real quick. See if I can find out that if they merged. I think Lockheed and them merged, but I could be wrong. Well, I know that Martin Marietta, that is a Martin, used to be a company, so Lockheed Martin merged. Let's see what it says here. Lockheed Martin Corporation is an American aerospace arms dealer, defense, information security, and technology operation. Okay, the merger of Lockheed was with Martin Marietta in 1995. Its headquarters is in North Bethesda, Maryland, and in the Washington, D.C. area. Lockheed Martin employs approximately 115,000 employees worldwide, including about 60,000 engineers and scientists as of January 2022. Lockheed Martin is one of the largest companies in aerospace, military support, security, and technological industry. It is the world's largest defense contractor by revenue for fiscal year 2014. 78% of Lockheed Martin revenues come from military sales. We top the list of U.S. federal government contractors and receive nearly 10% of its funds paid out by the Pentagon. They are the ones who, including a 2001 for being part of the development of the X-35/F-35B lift fan propulsion system, which is an airplane, and most recently in 2018 for the automatic ground collision avoidance system. Lockheed Martin is currently developing the F-35 Lightning II and leads the international supply chains there. So, net income as of 2021 was $6.32 billion. Its revenues were $67.04 billion in 2021. Its total assets are over $50.87 billion. It shows here at total employment is approximately 114,000, so 115,000 is not bad. So Lockheed is them. So let's see what else we got here. So I might be wrong about that, but I think McDonnell Douglas has either been bought out, might be part of Boeing. I don't know. We'll have to look at that up too, also. But anyway, but one of the most sinister of the SRS programs, with the possibility of doing tremendous damage in all in the direction of which the United States will go, socially, morally, and religiously, was Standards Charles F. Kettering, Ketterin Foundation, Changing Images of Man under Stanford official reference contract number URH 489-2150, Policy Research Report number 4474, prepared by SR Center for the Study of Social Policy, Director Willis Harman. This is probably the most far-reaching investigations to how man might be changed that has ever been conducted. The report covering 319 pages was written by 14 new scientists under the supervision of Tavistock and 23 top controllers, including B.F. Skinner, Margaret Mead, Irvin Lazio, and Sir Geoffrey Vickers, a high-level British intelligence officer in the MI6. It will be recalled that the son-in-law, Sir Peter Vickers Hall, was a founding member of the so-called Conservative Heritage Foundation. Much of the 3,000 pages of recommendations given to the Reagan administration in January 81 were based upon material taken from Willis Harman's Changing Image of Man. I was privileged to receive a copy of the Changing Image of Man from my intelligent colleague 5 days after it was accepted by the United States government. What I read shocked me as I realized I was looking at a blueprint for a future America, unlike anything I had ever seen before. The nation was to be programmed to change and become so accustomed to such planned changes that it would hardly be noticeable when profound change did occur. We have gone downhill so fast since the Aquarian conspiracy, this book title of Willis Harman's technical paper was written, that today divorce draws no stigma, suicide is at an all-time high, and raises few eyebrows. Social deviation from the norm and sexual aberrations once from the norm and sexual aberrations once unmentioned in decent circles are now commonplace and incite no special protest. As a nation, we have not noticed how changing image of mankind has radically changed, actually altered our American way of life forever. Somehow we were overcome by the Watergate syndrome. For a while, we were shocked and dismayed to learn that Nixon was nothing but a cheap crook who hobnobbed with Earl Warren's mafia friends at the beautiful home they built for him adjoining the Nixon estate. When too many future shocks and news headlines demanded our attention, we lost our way, or rather the huge number of choices with which we were and still are daily confronted confused us to such a degree that we were no longer able to make the necessary choices. Yeah, we're not able to connect the dots. That's what's happened. Let's see, we'll go on a little further. Worse yet, having been subjected to a barrage of crimes in high places, plus trauma of the Vietnam War, our nation seems no longer to want truths. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't. Such reaction is carefully explained in Willis Harman's technical paper. In short, the American nation was reacting exactly as profiled. Worse yet, in not wishing to accept truth, we took matters a step further. We looked to government to shield us from the truth. The corrupt stench of the Reagan-Bush administration we wanted to cover up with 6 feet of earth. Crimes committed on the title Iran-Contra affair or scandals we didn't want uncovered. We let our presidents lie to us regarding his whereabouts in the period of October 2023, 1980. Yet these crimes far exceed in quantity and scope anything Nixon did while he was in office. Do we as a nation recognize it as going downhill with our brakes off? No, we do not. When those whose business it is to bring the truth to the American people that a private, well-organized little government inside the White House was busy committing one crime after another, crimes which attacked the very soul of this nation and the Republican institution upon which it rested. We were told not to bother the public with such things. We really don't want to know about all this speculation because became a standard response. When the highest elected officer in the land blatantly put UN law above the Constitution of the United States, a impeachable offense majority accepted as normal. When the higher elected officials of the land went to war without a congressional declaration of war, the fact was censored out by the news media, and again, we accept it rather than face the truth. When the Gulf War, which our president plotted and planned, began, not only were we happy with censorship of the most blatant kind, we even took it to our hearts, believing that it was good for the war effort. Our president lied. April Gazette lied, the State Department lied. They saw the war was justified because President Hussein had been warned to leave Kuwait alone. When Gillespie's cables to the State Department were finally made public, one U.S. senator after another went charging to defend Gillespie, the harlot, you see. Wow. It matters not that it came from both the Democrats and Republicans. We, the people, let them get away with their vile lies. Well, because most of them are all stinking lawyers. That's what they are. They're already traitors in the first place. They traded us. In the public attitude of the American people, the wildest dream of Willis Harman and his teams of science became a reality. The Tavistock Institute was elated at its success in destroying the self-respect and self-esteem of this once great nation. We are told that we won the Gulf War. What is not yet perceived by the vast majority of Americans is that in winning the war, it cost the self-respect and honor of our nation. That lies rotting in the desert sands of Kuwait and Iraq, alongside the corpse of the Iraqi soldiers we butchered in the agreed retreat from Kuwait and Bosnia. We could not keep our word that we would abide by the Geneva Convention. Yeah, it hasn't been going on. We haven't been following the Geneva Convention actually since World War II. Ask the Germans what we did to them. Ask what Dwight Eisenhower did. And I'm not attacking them and not attack them. What do you want? Our controllers ask us victory or self-respect. You can't have both. 100 years ago, this could not have happened, but now it has happened and cites no comment. We have succumbed to the long-range penetration warfare waged against this nation by Tavistock. Like the German nation defeated by the Prudential bombing survey, enough of us have succumbed to make this nation the kind of that totalitarian regimes of the past would have only envisioned in their dreams. Here, they would say, is a nation, one of the largest in the world, that doesn't want the truth. All our propaganda agencies can be dispensed with. We don't have the struggle to keep the truth from the nation. They have willingly rejected it on their own volition. This nation is a pushover. I'm going to stop there, I think, folks. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. Let me finish one more. This is how the Tavistock Institute and Willis Harman program us to react. Dismantling ideas goes on without the protest. The spiritual and intellectual drive of our people has been destroyed. On May 27, 1991, President Bush made a very profound statement, the thrust of which appears to have been totally misused by most political commentators. The moral dimension of American policy requires us to chart a moral course through a world of lesser evils. That is the real world, not black and white, very few moral absolutes. And that's where I'm going to stop tonight. Again, this is from John Coleman in his book. I wanted to share that with you. Yeah, I'm approximately 45 minutes here. I don't see anyone here is listening or actually here. Most people don't want to know this, but you're gonna hear it from somebody because I'm going to speak the truth here. Most people just don't want to know this. They don't want to know how bad it is. Many people want to live in a lolly. They just want to live in a lolly, world. They just want to. They don't want to face real reality. So this is the conspiracy hierarchy of the Committee of 300. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you listening. I hope that you look into this, and if you do, will you pass it on to others? It's very critical, folks, for us to be aware. Okay, wish you good night. You take care. Talk to you later.